By now, we have all grown used to visions of AI-driven revolutions. Artificial intelligence is expected to revolutionize healthcare, transportation, and the creative industry. But there's one aspect of human life in which it is already making a difference on the ground: the battlefield. So, are we ready for the age of fully autonomous weapons? Good evening, my name is Mateusz Mazzini, and this is Wider View. Our main story tonight is about artificial intelligence, or more specifically, weapons systems powered by machine learning technology that uses neural networks. But don't switch the TV off just yet. This isn't going to be yet another hyper-enthusiastic or catastrophic vision of whether AI will save us or kill us all. Instead, we want to show you what's already out there. We will focus on Ukraine, which has become a laboratory for AI-powered military technology. But we will also take a wider view of hardware development in this sector. So how widespread is the use of AI on the battlefield now? We examine that in our first report.
Depending on how you define artificial intelligence systems, their application for military purposes can be traced all the way back to the 1960s. That's when Joseph Weizenbaum, a German-born scientist working in the US, attempted to develop technology that would allow a computer to launch missiles. Progress on the project stalled for several decades, but it picked up rapidly in the early 2000s thanks to considerable investment from the US federal government. The New York Times reports that the US military first used machine learning during the first Obama administration.
We live in a strange time.
It was initially employed in the areas of logistics and supply, but the technology soon broke into offensive munitions. Right now, according to research published by Foreign Affairs magazine, at least 30 countries have autonomous weapons in their arsenals. But the development of AI-based military tech has not gone without disruptions. The main barrier for another leap is, as everywhere in machine learning, the lack of operational data. Like any other invention, these systems need to be battle-tested to become efficient. And that's not possible without a conflict where they can be readily deployed. That's why Ukraine's fight against the Russian invasion is currently the world's largest testing ground for autonomous weapons. Thanks to the immense resourcefulness of its own tech sector, Ukraine is building drones and anti-drone systems to strengthen its defenses. Considerable help has also come from American companies, including Palantir, Starlink, and Anduril. But there are also issues around AI in the war, such as the lack of international regulations on its use. The future is already here, but it's as uncertain as the present.
Are we already living in the times of killer robots? Will artificial intelligence help Ukrainians defeat the Russian invaders? And when a drone autonomously kills a man, whose responsibility is it? Not an easy set of questions to begin with, but we have experts joining us tonight who can most certainly tackle them. Joining us tonight are Dr. Ivana Stradner from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and Arthur Owen-Michel, founder of the Center for the Study of the Drone. Good evening and welcome to Wider View. And I want to begin straight away with you, Ivana, and please paint us a picture, a general one, of AI at war. How widespread is the use of autonomous weapons systems on the battlefield right now? And do we have verifiable evidence that they have actually ever been deployed in combat?
Thank you very much for inviting me. And the video that you have just showed actually perfectly pictures what is happening in the field of artificial intelligence. Because this is, as you mentioned, really nothing new, but we do have more data. And what's happening right now in Ukraine that we can elaborate more later, it tells us really all you need to know of the importance of artificial intelligence. But let me first paint the big picture, is that we are indeed in the West in a serious competition with countries such as Russia and China when it comes to the use of artificial intelligence. And they're already, developing all those tools. And if you, for example, take a look at Putin's statement in 2017, he openly claimed that basically the goal is for Russia to become the ruler of the world in artificial intelligence. And just take a look at his latest national security strategy that has a special part that is devoted to artificial intelligence. A very similar thing is, related to China. So basically, right now, what we are experiencing, we have like a military around the world that are already incorporating what you just showed, like robotics, autonomous systems, in their forces. They use artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, and surveillance actually technology. So this is really nothing new. And if you follow very closely combat operations, actually you can actually see how we can use robot swarms and autonomous systems actually, and how they shape the combat, because the ultimate goal is clearly to decrease the number of personnel that can actually lose their lives in the combat, but also to increase the operational power. So basically, all those AI in military applications are advancing extremely rapidly. You can, for example, take a look at how about data processing, the combat simulation, how you can actually target recognition. I follow specifically influence operations related to artificial intelligence and the use of.
I'm going to interrupt you here, Ivana, for a second, because we're going to talk about regulations and also about Russia and China, but I want to focus for this part of our discussion more specifically on Ukraine. And let's turn to you, Arthur, because many authors all over the world have been labeling the current conflict in Ukraine the first AI war. So 2 questions in one. Is this actually correct assessment? And also, how important is artificial intelligence and autonomous systems on the battlefield in Ukraine right now?
First, thanks so much for having me here. It's great to be with you. Funnily enough, the war in Ukraine is not the first war to be described as the first AI war.
But is it actually the first AI war then?
Well, that is really the fundamental question, and it comes down to how you want to define AI or fully autonomous. Think about all of the decisions that a human needs to make in carrying out an attack. If you want to define fully autonomous as a machine that can carry out all of those steps without human intervention, then no, we haven't seen that. We haven't seen actual artificial reasoning, through the whole kill chain, as it's called. But if you're talking about automating the individual steps leading to the use of force, then yes, we're very much in that new reality. And indeed, it's not a reality that began with the war in Ukraine. This is something that has been happening for many years.
So I'm going to jump on this a little bit, Arthur, and ask you specifically a follow-up question here. Which elements of the kill chain have not yet been automated then?
Okay, that's great. So what has been automated are the things that are often at the very end of the process. So the final few seconds, for example, when a drone is actually guiding itself towards a target. What hasn't been automated are the higher order cognitive and reasoning processes. for example, strategy. So, a soldier goes into an area and they have to make decisions about how to navigate that area, how to prioritize different objectives, how to differentiate between different targets and prioritize them as according to their mission goals. Things that happen often a long time, minutes or hours before the actual use of force. And we haven't seen AI doing all of that in a way that connects those early reasoning decisions all the way to the use of force itself. What we have seen, though, is AI supporting some of those earlier processes as well. For example, in identifying potential targets in satellite imaging. We have seen AI that can help in sort of planning activities, but we still haven't seen a system that connects that whole chain, if that makes sense.
And how much of that is actually taking place right now in Ukraine, or has been taking place since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukrainian territory?
I mean, all of it. We have seen drones that have target recognition capabilities, some self-guidance capabilities, but it doesn't seem like they do very complex guidance tasks. We have seen a lot of the use of object recognition in satellite imagery, a lot probably, although it's not spoken about as much, in electronic intelligence, so deciphering patterns or events of interest in, say, radio chatter or online chatter. And of course, as was mentioned, the use of systems like Palantir, which is about managing databases, managing data, and sort of assembling plans in a way that takes into account all sorts of disparate sources of information and gives the decision maker access to all sorts of reasoning support tools. These are called decision support systems. So we've seen the whole range of it. But again, and I need to stress this, we haven't seen something that automates that entire process.
And very quickly, in a few sentences, if you could just sum it up, Arthur, is it possible that that thing actually exists and the fact that we are not aware of its existence is just because it's been kept hidden outside of the public eye?
No, I can say flatly that that doesn't exist, and partly is because that is still tactically and operationally and strategically undesirable. Commanders want to have visibility into what their people, their subordinates are doing. If you have a tool that automates that whole process, that's just a bit too much of a loss of control, and the technology still isn't there for commanders to trust in it in that way. So I can say with fairly high certainty that we haven't seen that.
Straightforward answer from you, Arthur. Thank you very much, both of you, for the concise assessment of the technological advancements on the Ukrainian side of the front lines. Let's take our discussion now to other places and see who else is using AI in military technology and for what purposes. Traditionally, it's always been the United States Armed Forces that had the best, most advanced weapons systems. But now, other countries are acquiring shiny new kit for their men in uniform. Some of it more sophisticated than the American toys. From China to Israel, and from India to Iran. Our next report maps out the global use of AI for military purposes.
In February 2024, a sizable delegation of Russian diplomats visited Beijing. The trip was planned as part of a bilateral working group on the development of autonomous warfare systems. An uptick in cooperation between Russia and China has been visible since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. But the promise of working together on AI-based weapons is more proof that this relationship is stronger than ever. Another close Russian ally that's made considerable advancements in military tech is Iran. Authorities in Tehran deny having fully autonomous drones, but concerns in the West are growing. As the country continues to supply Russia with a range of munitions, the transfer of autonomous weapons could be a matter of time. And it could just as easily be deployed locally as the likelihood of a direct confrontation with Israel grows. The latter has made extensive use of AI-based technology in its offensive in Gaza. Israel has used machine learning for target location, face recognition, and attack simulations, but the capabilities of its tech could be far greater. In fact, the very first military strike without a human decision-maker might have already taken place. In March 2020, Turkish Cargo 2 drones were deployed during the domestic conflict in Libya, where Ankara supports the local government of national accord in its fight against the Libyan National Army. A UN report published a year later indicates that missiles could have been fired from Turkish drones without human involvement. Turkey denied these allegations, but experts are certain fully autonomous systems are already prepared for deployment.
So, Ivana, let's begin with you again. We talked extensively about Ukrainians, but what about the other side of that conflict? So, do Russians use artificial intelligence for military purposes as well, both in Ukraine and in general in their military forces? And where do they get their tech from, since they're so heavily sanctioned? Is it primarily through cooperation with China?
So, as I mentioned, Putin in 2017 openly claimed basically that one of the key roles for Russia is to become the global leader of the world in artificial intelligence. And if you read carefully Russia's security analysts, they openly claim who has information superiority is going to win this war. So having said that, we have to first think how Russia is thinking strategically. In terms of tactically, you're absolutely right. Yes, Russia and China operate together, and Russia has been also developing its own companies inside Russia for artificial intelligence, but also has been using proxies countries to use sanction evasion and to actually have access to data. And that's something that here we in the West, we really have to pay more attention to. The second thing that I want to emphasize, if you, for example, follow closely what is happening on the battlefield in Ukraine, yes, Russia has been actually using and developing a lot of tools related to artificial intelligence, whether to use it for a decoy, whether to use it for a swarming strategy, just filling the blank, everything that other militaries are also using.
And how does, I'm going to interrupt you here briefly, how does their technological equipment compare to the ones used by Ukrainians? Is it better, worse, more efficient? Do we know?
We provide definitely Ukraine with a lot of data and intelligence and different support. So the US, I still believe, that we are leading those efforts, but we should also not undermine Russian efforts in this field, because there are numerous reports, how they are using data for collection, analysis, support, decision-making processes. As I mentioned, just take a look at including their information operations campaign that are clearly supported by artificial intelligence and big data. Also, take a look, for example, how artificial intelligence is applied in cyber warfare, what I just mentioned, in terms of information operations. So all those things are actually tell us all we really need to know, that Russia is indeed a serious actor. However, China is leading those efforts, and that's why is better than Russia, and that's why they're cooperating together. For example, also if you take a look at the United Nations, even if you are not an idealist and believe that the United Nations can prevent future wars, just take a look at how Russia and China are operating even there. And that's something extremely important, because they're putting all those efforts, what you just mentioned at the early stages of our conversation, that we do not have a legal framework for this. And that's why they're particularly pushing those narratives in the United Nations that we develop a new treaty on artificial intelligence. Why? Because we here in the West, as democracy, we have to follow certain rules. Russia and China do not. And it matters because when it comes to artificial intelligence, it's also about decision-making processes that has to be super fast, that has to be timely. And when you have lawyers who will restrict your actions based on domestic but also international legality, that's exactly why Russia and China are pushing those narratives.
And are they succeeding on the international front of supporting the regulations for the use of AI on the battlefield?
If you, for example, take a look at what's happening in the United Nations, I believe that they're having an upper hand, and that's why, in particular, specifically China is leading those efforts. Make no mistake, even later this year, that's all you really need to know. You will have a new UN cybercrime treaty that is developing, that is actually led by Russia and supported by China. And the next step, what they want to do is to make a similar framework for artificial intelligence, and the third framework for information operations. And it's not because they deeply care about international law. No, they're using that just as a tool, that we sign all those treaties, that we have to follow those rules, while, there is no supranational authorities that can enforce those legal obligations if China and Russia do not comply. So
Absolutely. So let's cast our net a little wider here, and over to you, Arthur, because one of the major issues concerning autonomous systems is lack of transparency. We just heard in our report about this very controversial case of Turkish drones being deployed in Libya, and then the year after we heard there was an investigation carried out by the United Nations. The United Nations said there was a use of autonomous weapons. The Turkish authorities, the manufacturer of the drone, denied. How can we increase or try to increase transparency in the use of autonomous systems?
That is, in a way, the fundamental challenge that we're dealing with. When it comes to trying to gauge the extent to which countries have or are developing or are using AI, I always urge caution, and that is because AI has a tremendous propagandistic power. If you say to the world that you have machine learning based drones that can do autonomous target recognition and this, that, and the other, then that makes you look strong, it makes you look tough, it makes you look formidable and advanced. What we see time and time again, though, is that when it actually comes to the operational use of these systems, countries get very, very shy indeed. So there's the case of the Turkish drone, where the manufacturer's website said that it could do all of these things autonomously. It could actually match the criteria of a fully autonomous weapon. But then there was flat denial that it actually did any of those things in conflict. And the challenge is that because it's software, because it's the flick of a switch that determines whether this system is going to be autonomous or fully remote controlled, there's actually very little proof of it. We've seen the same thing happen in Israel, where Israel has declared, for example, that its war in 2021 was the first AI war. But then when reporting came out this year about their use of machine learning in targeting, they very much scaled back on those pretty bombastic claims and said, no, this is data management software. The machine learning is not making fully autonomous decisions. There's always a human in the loop. And so in a way, that is the context that we're dealing with. What is always ultimately going to help in demands for transparency is for stakeholders and the public to have a better understanding of the technology, to look at the claims of a country and say, I know what the technology is capable of, and I'm just going to tell you that is either an underestimate of what the country has, an accurate assessment, or indeed, a total exaggeration for, again, these propagandistic purposes.
So to finish on a more upbeat note, both of you, in one sentence, if you could, first Arthur and then Ivana, a good and ethical use of AI on the battlefield. What could that look like?
You might not like this answer, but AI can be used for a lot of good on the battlefield if that's what militaries want. If that lines up with their goals, you can reduce civilian casualties, you can reduce friendly fire incidents. But if you look at the reasons that militaries are actually developing military AI, it's not to do those things. Their primary goal is speed, scale, and lethality. And if that is your only, guiding principle for developing the technology, then it's going to be very, very hard to achieve those, beneficial uses that might otherwise be possible.
And Ivana, one sentence, ethical AI on the battlefield.
I'm also delivering, not so positive news, because indeed, US has actually led such an effort, and a lot of countries actually have joined this effort. However, as I mentioned, even if Russia and China support Western effort in the use of ethics when it comes to artificial intelligence, they are particularly not bound by any of those rules because, as I mentioned, there is no supranational authority that can actually enforce those rules.
Absolutely.
So,
I'm afraid that this is all we have time for tonight, so we have to cut that discussion short. And I'm afraid the details of autonomous system deployments will remain inaccessible to the wider public for quite some time. But nonetheless, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Ivana Stadner and Arthur Oland Michel were our guests in today's edition of Wider View. Countries all over the world are interested in waging wars without human involvement. After all, it's a win-win situation. It saves lives, at least those of soldiers, and taxpayer money, as robots are cheaper in maintenance. International legal norms, however, lag behind, and they need to catch up quickly because unregulated use of autonomous weapons could lead to truly apocalyptic results. Thank you for being with us tonight. Next week, we will try to conduct a detailed examination of Hungary, for all intents and purposes, the troublemaker of the European Union. Make sure you're with us next Thursday, and have a good evening.